So the people who were economically anxious in 2016 are no longer economically anxious in 2018, despite the fact that little, if anything, has changed for the working class. That report just came out, or at least the first portion of what I said came out. The Marketplace Edison research poll finds record low economic anxiety across the United States. And this is the same research firm in conjunction with marketplace.org, the podcast or the broadcast that goes across NPR. Back in October of 2016, just before the elections, they're the ones that many people cite in terms of proving in a way that it was economically anxious people who switched or who ended up taking Donald Trump to the White House. Now, 2 years later, that group is no longer economically anxious, according to the same research. In fact, it's dropped to the lowest level, finds record low economic anxiety. First things first, what has changed for the working class between 2016 and 2018? Somebody tell me that. Nothing. What has changed is who's in the White House. What has changed is what he's giving to the wealthiest people across this country. Which made me wonder. I'm actually working on an article, and I haven't finished the article because I was like, at first I was going to do the video, and then I was like, well, let me do the article. Maybe the article will help me do the video. Then I realized doing the video is going to help me do the article because I can just talk this out with you. It made me ask the question, what did they use as a metric for economic anxiety in the first place? I mean, everybody's been running with this economic anxiety trope for a very long time. And if people are now no longer economically anxious, what in the world was the first metric for economic anxiety? That story, coupled with a second article, actually a study done by 3 political scientists, one from UCLA, one from UC Riverside, and one from Princeton. They've concluded that they found more statistically significant evidence that people who switched from Obama to Trump in 2016 were motivated by racial animus. So you put these two stories, or two studies rather, came out in the last 24 hours, and you juxtapose them side by side, and you start to get the picture that I've been painting for some time. And people who just kind of have a pulse for these things, we have intuition about these things. We knew that this narrative of economic anxiety did not hold water, it did not hold its own weight. Now, to be sure, this is not to say that there are not any economically anxious people in America. That would be ridiculous, and nobody is asserting that. But this is to say that if we are shaping all of our analyses around catering to this working class, which has really been reduced to just the white working class who are experiencing anxiety, then how do we answer this question now that the same study that people have cited in terms of justifying the economic anxiety as a means of rather justifying Donald Trump becoming president, now they're no longer economically anxious? And this study from 3 political scientists that shows that there's more evidence to suggest that people left Obama to go to Trump because of racial animus. Here's the first thing that's a problem with that, with this idea that people have been forwarding for a long time. And actually, let me put a pause here. This is why it's important. If we are going to shape the way that we approach outreach and the way we approach our national conversation, and particularly with regard to avoiding identity politics, which generally has become the shorthand for catering to the economically anxious white working class. Now, of course, you're probably not going to get many videos or articles that are going to say it that expressly. But the sum total of what they have been suggesting for some time is that if we communicate on economic terms with the white working class, then we can get those voters who left Obama and went to Trump back, because they couldn't possibly have gone to Trump because of racism, because they voted for the black guy twice. So our entire view of our entire approach to addressing this phenomenon has been to really sacrifice identity issues and to put race secondary, or to basically, not be willing to engage in the necessary fights, the fights that are necessary for us to actually make progress. I want to start here, even though we've been talking now for about five minutes on the dot. I want to start here is that you will never, as a progressive, socialist, communist, whoever you are that opposes capitalism in the United States, we will never get remotely close to attacking or successfully dismantling capitalism in the United States of America if we don't first get past the firewall of racism and white supremacy. The very first line of defense for capitalism in this country is racism and white supremacy. And people have tried to shape this into being a chicken or the egg kind of argument, in the sense of, well, why are they racist? And then the answer coming from class reductionists is, oh, they're racist because the wealthy elite want to keep us divided and they know they can divide us based on race. They're not really racist. They're just being played by people who are playing the race card and trying to keep the working class divided. That becomes a chicken or the egg argument, because that, whether or not that is accurate, the fact of the matter is that they are racist and they have a strong level of racial animus, what the researchers called racial conservatism. Right. And maybe we'll call it that to make it easier, make the rest of this video palatable, this podcast or video, whatever the hell I'm doing, more palatable. Racially conservative views with regard to black people and to immigrants. The fact of the matter is they are that. And that is your first firewall. That is the first line of defense that you have to get through in order to get remotely close to their thinking about class, remotely close to their material thinking, because what trumps, no pun intended, what trumps their economic well-being historically in this country has been racial animus. And so, yes, of course, the elite can play to that. Fine. But the fact of the matter is, unless you address that, you're never going to get any closer to your racial, to capitalism, basically. But I was going to say something snarky, but it's really not necessary. You're not going to get any closer to capitalism and even tempering the effects, the ravages of capitalism, because you can't get past that firewall, that barrier of white supremacy and racism that blocks them from seeing the reality about their economic condition in this country. So regardless if you want to engage in this chicken or egg argument, the fact of the matter is, at the core of what is moving a lot of voters today, based on now a study from multiple political scientists, this is just the latest addition in this line of statistical studies that demonstrate that these voters who left Obama and went to Trump actually did so because of racial animus. Now, let's dig into that, because people are going to be like, Ben, that makes no sense. Let's start with this. It absolutely is it's a problem if you start off this conversation believing that someone who voted for a black man is not racist by default and cannot be racist going forward in the future, almost as though their single act of voting for a black man was an act of absolution that absolved them of all of their previous racism or possible racism, right? And in perpetuity going forward, always protects them from ever being racist ever again. Does anybody else see the problem with that? Because it's very possible, and actually did occur, that white people who have racially conservative views, as these three researchers from these distinguished institutions put it, that these individuals still held racially conservative views and voted for Barack Obama. In fact, there's a study, an analysis rather, by, let me get his name. What is this guy's name? Michael. his name escapes me, but he did a study, an analysis, not a study, but analysis of some data in the Washington Post just after the election, and he demonstrated that nearly a quarter of all the white people who voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012 did so while still holding the belief that interracial dating was to be frowned upon, and that they strongly disagreed with interracial dating. I mean, Michael Tesler, I wasn't going to stop until I found it. Michael Tesler, that they voted for Barack Obama and still believed that interracial dating was a bad thing. I mean, if there's not one clear way of identifying someone who has racially conservative views, I think that's definitely one metric of it, right? There's not going to be one single thing. I mean, the only thing we all agree upon, generally speaking, is if a white person uses the N-word, which I think is overly simplistic and overly reductionist, but I digress. 20%, about 20 to 25% of the white voters who voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012 believed that interracial dating was bad. And so therein lies the problem with this assumption that if you voted for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, that you can't be a racist. And then not only could you have not previously been a racist, then going forward in perpetuity, you have been forever absolved. It's like, I mean, it's like getting baptized with your vote with Barack Obama saved you, gave you eternal salvation from being a racist. When in reality, they were a racist before they voted for Obama, and they were a racist or racially conservative when they went over to Donald Trump.